Welcome to the Produce or Die podcast. This is a show dedicated to video producers and filmmakers who want to achieve massive creative and financial success. So let's roll. Hello everybody, welcome to episode 9, Getting Your Dream Project Funded. I think it's fair to say that most filmmakers have a dream project, something that they would love to make, whether it's a film or a short series or a full-length documentary. The problem is that most people don't believe that it's actually possible, so therefore they don't take the required steps to get there, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But imagine for a second, just 1 second, that you get paid really well to produce a piece of content or tell a story that you've wanted to make for years or possibly your whole life. And in a split second, your dream project turns into a reality. This isn't some airy-fairy bollocks. This can happen, and I know it can happen because it's happened to me. And that's what this episode is about. Getting paid to make your dream project, to tell your dream story, your dream piece of content. For us, it was getting our travel and comedy show Misadventures funded up front, and I wanted to share some lessons and stories from this exciting period. I'm going to talk about the highs and lows that we had and give you an insight as to what I think will massively increase your chances of getting something funded. So let's go back to when we got funded. The email we received read, Misadventures, green light. Woo! We had just had a show commissioned from scratch for more money than we had ever had. Getting paid up front meant two things. The first was that we had built enough trust with the people who controlled the purse strings that they believed we could create and deliver a great series from scratch. And the second thing was we had more pressure and expectations on our shoulders than we had ever had. So first things first, what position were we in and what assets did we have that enabled us to get the funding in the first place? Firstly, we already had a successful series, Blade NZ, and there were obvious flaws in Blade NZ. Some of the stories weren't great, but people enjoyed the series and we had sold it overseas to the Travel Channel. We also had experience in reality TV and good storytelling skills. And this was evident from not only Blade NZ, but several viral videos we had made and our background in working on other projects like The Bachelor and The Block and those types of things. We also had an established online audience that enjoyed our content. We had skills in marketing ourselves and being known in people's world. This was because every time that we put out a video, we would make sure that we distributed it effectively, which was bit by bit building our brand and getting our name out there. And finally, we had created a pilot episode of Misadventures. This pilot episode, it wasn't perfect, but it was a great representation of what the show would be. So out of all of the above things, I believe that having something to show the decision makers was the most important thing. And with any project, I still believe this to be the case. The fact is that if you can produce a piece of content, it means you put your money where your mouth is and it allows people to envision the end product. It'll also subliminally give them trust and faith in you and remove any subconscious barriers that they may have around you not being actually able to deliver, particularly if you haven't made a show or a successful film before. In other words, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. I also think it's important to genuinely believe that you can make something that can do well, because all of your confidence in your project will be communicated when you have meetings, and you need to be 100% committed to making it happen and display immense amounts of passion and enthusiasm when you meet with the decision makers. So what was Misadventures? The idea was that we would travel around New Zealand in a beat-up van, searching for interesting characters and inspiring locations wherever we would go. So if you're in Australia, we were going for a kind of Hamish and Andy vibe, a couple of lovable losers cruising around and meeting entertaining characters. We wanted the journey to be a mix of pre-planned activities and characters, but we also wanted to leave a lot of room for improvising and seeing where the road and journey took us, pretty much like what happens when you go travelling for real. So we hit the road and we travelled around in our van for about 4 weeks. It was the absolute trip of a lifetime. And along the way, we met some crazy characters and we got some awesome content. We went and did shark cage diving with great whites. We met a crazy psychic and we saw some of the most beautiful scenery and landscapes that New Zealand has to offer. One highlight was visiting a really remote part of New Zealand called the Catlins, and we met some locals who love hot sauce. And we did a hot sauce challenge with them where we had to have a shot of New Zealand's hottest hot sauce and then wait 10 minutes before we could drink some milk to soothe the burning. And the heat was so intense. My body went absolutely nuts. It didn't know how to handle itself, and it was so intense that my stomach got upset and I literally shat my pants on camera. And we really wanted to push the envelope with our content. We wanted to get into situations that were awkward, that were real, and we had an idea to visit a place called Gloria Vale. If you're from New Zealand, you'll know about Gloria Vale because they're regularly in the news and usually not for good things. So Gloria Vale is a secluded community on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand. It's a very religious place where people on the inside have almost no connection to the outside world. They don't have internet and they're limited in all of the information that they get. Gloria Vale is a self-sufficient community. It has everything. It has a massive farm and they make everything themselves, all their food and even their clothing. Due to their religious beliefs, they're not allowed to use contraception. So they have huge families and it's not uncommon for parents to have up to 10 kids. But there is a very dark side to Gloria Vale that has been told from people that have chosen to leave there, and there's a lot of controversy around sexual misconduct with minors. One thing about Gloria Vale is it's a very male-dominated place, and the way it works there is there's a group of elders who are all male, and 75% of them are quite old, and the elders are the decision makers of the community. They decide everything. They decide what job you get, where you work for your whole life, and they even decide who you marry. The idea we had was that Josh and I would stay in Gloria Vale for a couple of days so we could experience life like the people of Gloria Vale. But to film there, we knew it was a long shot because Gloria Vale is skeptical about letting camera crews in because they have got so much bad press. However, Josh rang Gloria Vale and then from the front desk he got put through to one of the elders called Fervent. And Fervent agreed that we could go and meet the elders, have lunch together and pitch our filming idea. We didn't even think that we were going to get this opportunity, so we were pretty nervous. We were actually going to Gloria Vale. And on our first visit we weren't allowed to film anything, but we were still excited. And we drove through the secluded west coast and eventually arrived at Gloria Vale. So we went to the front gate and we got welcomed in by one of the elders into the dining room where we would be eating. On the wall hung a huge blown up painting of the whole community, which was about 800 people at the time. There were hundreds of kids in the photo, and one of the elders said almost instantly, if this was the outside world, these children would all be dead. Using contraception means your parents are murderers. I was like, cool, well, nice to meet you too. Soon the other elders came in and we sat around a table. It was weird, and instantly the sexist and male-dominated environment was clear because the girls would come in and they were so polite and so timid. It was obvious that they were the servants and the men ordered them around. We met each of the elders and we sat around and ate lunch. Steak, potato and salad. They even served us their homemade ice cream for dessert. I couldn't stop thinking about how weird it was sitting around the table with these known sexual predators and how vastly different their lives were to mine. They talked about God all the time. They were just constantly preaching and they were so proud, almost smug, about how great their life was on the inside. But the weird thing was, many of the elders had experienced life in their younger years outside of Gloria Vale. One man told us, "Oh, I sinned more ways than you can imagine." In other words, the elders got to experience the best of both worlds. They got to go out and sin, on the outside, but then they just got to come in and redeem themselves inside Gloria Vale. However, they wouldn't let anyone else in. It was a bit hypocritical, but of course we didn't say anything. Then the fun started. Fervent was so proud of Gloria Vale that he took us on a tour. We walked through the kitchen where we saw them churning butter. Then we saw a new school that they were building, an awesome music room, and we saw where they made their clothes. But the weirdest and most awkward thing that still haunts me to this day was when we walked up to the accommodation block. There are various big buildings, and each of them house a whole bunch of families. So if you imagine a university hostel, but instead of one person in one dorm room, there's one family. So inside one room, there'll be a double bed with mum and dad, but then there will be multiple bunk beds with the kids. And judging by the number of kids that each family has, there are so many kids, so there must be some serious fornicating going on, all within meters of their own kids. So that was our trip to Gloria Vale. In terms of our pitch, we mustn't have done a very good job because when we followed up, we weren't allowed to film there. It was a shame, but getting denied of filming and taking risks and having things not pay off, that's all part of the fun of filmmaking and creating guerrilla-style content. Anyway, the rest of the filming of Misadventures was an absolute blast. And funnily enough, on the day that we finished our last shot, and we started driving home, the van blew up. So what about post-production? Well, post-production was a journey in itself. As you'll be well aware, editing takes time, and we had a lot of footage to get through, and we also had to shoot some interviews that we were doing afterwards to help piece the story together, as well as add voiceover. And of course, then there's sound mixing, color grading, and the delivery of the content. And things went wrong many times. Time was disappearing very fast. The content we had was great and we were stoked with it. It was funny, it was beautiful, it was coming together well, but it was coming together too slow. Because remember, we only had a team of 3 people. So at one point we tried to hire editors, but none of them could do a good job. Even one of them, who we were paying $800 a day, was no good, and we had to re-edit his cuts. Although the 3 of us kept it together, it did get quite tense sometimes because we all knew that we were fighting against the clock. In the final week, we were editing the last episode, and Tom, our editor, stayed up for 48 hours straight. He was editing, but he was completely delusional, so we made him go to bed. It was a pretty crazy few days. But we made it, and when the show was released, it performed really well on the TVNZ On Demand platform. We even won Best Factual Web Series in New Zealand, which was super cool. It had been our best piece of content to date and exceeded both ours and other people's expectations. And of course, we managed to sell it around the world too. It's not perfect, but I love watching the show now, and I have fond memories of creating it. So the key lessons and takeaways from creating my dream project: the first is embrace the struggle. You'll miss it when it's gone. And the struggle is where the lessons are hiding. You might not see them at the time. Things will be going wrong and you'll be going, no, this didn't go to plan. This wasn't how it's meant to be. But in hindsight, that's exactly how it was meant to be. So when things go wrong, embrace it. The second lesson I learned is creating your dream project is more possible than you think. It's all about a long-term strategy. You've got to constantly keep improving and constantly think about the type of content that people want to see and how you can meet that demand. And the last lesson, which I think is the most valuable lesson, is team up with people who share the same dream as you. This will make it so much more fun and massively increase the likelihood of getting success. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Get out there, chase your dream project, and make it happen. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. If you've enjoyed this episode or you want to give me any feedback, hit me up on Instagram at mearle.nz. Laters.